So welcome everyone. I'm Adrienne Levine. I lead the Center for the Advancement of Teaching. I'm also a faculty member in Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering. I'm joined by co-facilitators today, Kimiko Haas, Director of Instructional Improvement Programs in CAT, Caroline Kong, Instructional Designer and Technologist, also in CAT, and Kim DeBacco, Instructional Designer in Online Teaching and Learning. So welcome to our panel session on using discussion platforms for student engagement, community, and learning. Discussion platforms or discussion forums, whatever you call them, are a mechanism for enabling communication outside of class time. Examples are the CCLE discussion forum, Piazza, Campuswire, Slack, and there are others. And faculty at UCLA have been using these and other platforms for many years in both in-person and online courses. During the pandemic, as we all realized the importance of creating a sense of community within our classes, it could be argued that discussion forums became an even more important pedagogical tool. The panelists today have used a variety of discussion forums, both pre-pandemic and during the pandemic. They use them in different ways, ranging from primarily a communication tool and forum for students to have their questions answered, to a mechanism for students to explore and interpret course content, to see multiple points of view from their classmates, and to submit graded work. So we have a set of questions we'll be asking of the panelists for approximately the first hour. During that time, the audience is welcome to use the chat as a sidebar to communicate with each other, and we'll try to make time to intersperse a few audience questions as well. And then for approximately the last half hour, we will be opening up 2 breakout rooms where you can meet more informally with the panelists and see how Campuswire and Slack work and ask more detailed questions. Our panelists today are Melissa Paquette-Smith from psychology, Josh Samani from physics, Sheva Gross, psychology, Tony Friscia, integrative biology and physiology and director of cluster programs, and Chris Surro from economics. So I see there are some comments in the chat. I don't know if I need to, no, I don't need to respond to any of them. So let's get going and jump in with a question that gets, and I think we could probably take down the slide. Yeah, great. A question that gets straight to the why and the how of discussion platforms. So what are your goals in using a discussion forum? Which forum do you use, and how do you use it to achieve those goals? So I want to ask this of all the panelists, and if someone wants to volunteer, great, otherwise I will pick. So I'm going to start with Tony. What are your goals? Which forum do you use, and how do you use it?
Sure. So I actually have used I used a couple different ones. I use the CCLE discussion forums a bit, and I use that mostly for kind of directed sort of things that related to the class, like asking questions about course material. In one course that I did, I attached some participation points to that, so they had to do that. I'm actually doing that in a course right now. So I use that CCLE discussion forums, and then in addition, I use Slack. And Slack, sorry, CCLE, in answer to the question there, the Moodle platform that we use as our course management system. And then for the, I've also used Slack, and that I used a bit more for more kind of informal sorts of discussions. I used that with my cluster course, so we signed students up for that. They use that for kind of, you know, informal conversations amongst themselves, to ask us questions. We did do some kind of official business in there. Students would sometimes contact me there about questions about course material and things like that. And we actually use it as the primary place where the teaching team talk together, because that's a course that has multiple faculty and teaching assistants that teach in it. So we use that as our primary way for us to keep in touch. So yeah, those are the platforms that I use and kind of why I use them.
Thank you. Let's see, Sheva, would you like to go next?
Sure, thanks, and welcome to everyone. Glad to be here. I have for a long time used CCLE, the Moodle platform, for discussion as well as question and answer. And I continue to use it now remotely for in-depth discussions of course material. I began using Slack this past fall and am completely hooked and use it for 3 primary modes of communication. First, like Tony, ongoing communication with my teaching team. Second, Second, also for direct communication with students. My inbox is so clean for the first time ever as an instructor. Thirdly, for class level communications about the course, including community building, and I can get into that a bit more. But the need, as we all know, for social contact and all that wraps around the course material to engage students in learning and a sense of belonging is so facilitated by Slack in my experience. And the fourth way that I use Slack, really taught to me by Gloria Tobiasen from the School of Education, is in class. It becomes a far easier and I find more effective tool than a million different ways of polling and using the chat window and other cool tools that we have. But this keeps them all in one place, and it's the same place my students will come back to outside of class, and including if they missed class, and they can even continue to contribute to a thread that began in class. I even give out instructions for breakout rooms and links right in the middle of class. We debrief after the breakout room in the thread for the week. So just a whole bunch of tools all in one platform.
Great. Actually, you said you would be saying more about building a sense of community. Do you want to expand on that a bit right now? You're muted.
I could. I have a feeling pictures help more. That's certainly what sold me. Is it an okay moment to share my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So let me make sure I got it right. Now you get to experience what my students do, filling the air.
Yep. I know it well.
I'm so sorry. Maybe I should get this ready. I hate to.
Okay, well, I can turn to another panelist and we can come back to you. Okay, so let's see. Melissa, would you like to answer this first question about your goals in using a discussion forum and how you use it?
Sure. So I teach introductory psychology, which is a large lower division course. So it's about 300 students per quarter. So my main goal in using a discussion platform is really to just give students a forum to ask questions. So I've used Piazza, I've used Campuswire. I find them pretty comparable, but there's no points associated with using these discussion forums. It's just another way that students can engage with the course. So they have other pieces of the course where they work in groups and things like that. So we're really just primarily using the discussion forum to give them a place to ask questions. So one of the things I really like about both Piazza and Campuswire is that there is this anonymous feature. And I think that really gets at the goal of getting students to ask questions, because it really lowers that barrier. So we have a lot of students who are comfortable coming to office hours, but we have a lot of students who might not be comfortable doing that, or might not be comfortable associating their name with the question. So I do actually find that a lot of students in my class post anonymously, which I think is great. So it gets at that goal of please just ask questions, and we're happy to help you work through the course. To encourage students to use this, I try and really pitch to students that responses are faster on these discussion platforms than they are if you email me. So the average response time, at least when I was using Piazza, was about 40 minutes. So I would tell students that, like, hey, you can get an answer in 40 minutes. If you email me, you probably won't get an answer until the next day. So really kind of pitching to students that this is a way to get an answer to your questions, either answered by your peers or answered by myself. So I will say that I think it works. I think it goes a long way to signal to students that we care, We value their input and questions, even in cases where they don't use it all that much. So I can say in my course, they're probably on the lower end in terms of using the platform. But I think they do feel quite supported to have the option to use the platform. Yeah.
Thank you, Melissa. Let's turn to Chris.
Sure. Hello, everyone. So I have used various discussion platforms. I've used the CCLE, the Moodle discussion platform. I've used Campuswire, and I've also started to use Slack a little bit in some of my classes. And I think they serve various purposes. So one, as Sheva was talking about, to kind of open up this community engagement and have some place where students can feel open to communicating. That's a little bit more personal or more open, I would say, than email. And then also, as Melissa was talking about, just having this kind of place where students feel more comfortable asking questions and that other students can actually see questions. So if you're just getting emails for all the questions and you're answering the questions of all these students, no one's going to see that except for you and the student. But if you're using Campuswire and somebody posts a question, the entire class can now see that question. Somebody that isn't even comfortable sending an email personally can now see, oh, I had the same question as this other person. I don't even need to ask. I can just lurk on the Campuswire forum and get my questions answered. So that's kind of the main reason I started shifting more towards discussion platforms than just doing everything through email. It also cuts down on the number of repeat questions you have to answer. Somebody asks the question on Campuswire, you can link and you can say, I answered this in number 32. It links to that question. You can just click on it directly and saves you a bunch of time that way. And then I think it's actually also a nice study tool for some students. So one of the things I tell them is when they ask me, oh, what should I do to study for the exam? I say, go through the Campuswire questions, try to answer them yourself. And then you can look and see what I've answered and see if you got it right. But if you can answer other students' questions, then you're gonna be doing a lot better for the exam. And it's a really good way. Maybe there's something I did in lecture and I kind of brushed over it. A bunch of students start asking questions about it, and then it really clears up that confusion really well. So that's why I really like these discussion board platforms. My chosen one of choices is Campuswire because I think the interface is kind of the nicest. But certainly, I think we have a little bit of data on this that using some discussion board platform is better than nothing at all. So whichever one you're most comfortable with, I highly recommend.
Thanks a lot, Chris. And I know Sheva is ready with her screen share, but first I'm going to let Josh answer this question. Go ahead, Josh.
Hi, everyone. Well, everyone pretty much covered all of my goals too. I don't have an enormous amount to add. I'll just highlight a couple of things that are the same for me, and then one different, maybe a new thing. So definitely for me, building a sense of community and supporting students and feeling like they can support each other is important. In particular, like students taking ownership in building their own community, I think is really powerful. And it's something that's very difficult to do in large enrollment classes without a discussion forum. And I typically teach classes of around 200 or so that really helps. Efficiency of communication with students is so much higher. Like I direct message students instead of email. And as others have mentioned, my email inbox is cleaner. Logistics, like students answering each other's logistics questions is amazing. I basically don't have to answer any questions about the syllabus anymore because someone has read something carefully and answers in like 5 minutes. And that's great. The space for answering anonymous questions for my courses are really important. There's a lot of, I would say, really just fear of asking questions in physics, especially among non-physics majors. So having that feature makes people a lot more comfortable. And the one thing I'll touch on, so I'm a Campuswire user currently. I used to use Piazza. I think they're both good. Campuswire, I think, has some advantages. The one that hasn't been highlighted that I wanted to highlight is that there's sort of a reputation leveling system. It's kind of like a gamification of course communication. And what I do is I incentivize leveling up on Campuswire with very small amounts of extra credit, like 0.1% of students' final grades. And it's amazing how much that tiny amount of extra credit that's essentially insignificant to grading motivates students to answer questions. So like, for example, why do students answer about the syllabus in 5 minutes? It's because they know that they know that they're going to get some sort of upvotes on their question. And so it increases efficiency. Basically the same as everyone else. I would again say that I think all of these discussion platforms are good. And depending on your use case, you might see benefits to one or the other. So I would say, check them all out, look at all of the various benefits of each one and see for your context which one you think is better. I think the platform is kind of secondary. Using one or trying to use one is probably just the way to go. Just start out with something. Thanks
very much. So I'm going to ask the second question because I think that it will be easy for Sheva to answer once she has her screen share up. And Josh, I'll also be asking you to share your screen. Okay. So the question is, since the purpose of a discussion forum is to foster discussion, could you describe or show an engaging discussion in your course and what makes it successful from your point of view? So Sheva, I don't know if your screen share is directed at answering this question. So if you want to go back to the previous one, you can use your screen share however you like.
Thank you. I feel empowered. I do actually have an example from CCLE as well as from Slack, because I am interested in students engaging in different forms of discussion. And those have different, I consider there to be different criteria for an effective discussion about the course material in depth versus more community building or in-class check-ins. So here's our Slack workspace. I've blocked out student identities so we can all look together. Before the class began, this was an effective discussion here that we call, my program is called ADP, Applied Developmental Psych Minor. So we created a set of channels just for fun, just for community building. This was AD Peeps, where students and the teaching team post pictures of themselves, both now and as children, since we're studying child development. There's also a way to use a channel in the moment in class to check in with students. So this one was an opportunity for people to share with each other how they minimize distractions in class. And this was one of our icebreakers that has real value for engaging students, both because they get to see, oh, everybody else has to close their tabs too. That's what they all came up with. I used the strategy of type it in, but don't press send until we all do it at the same time and get a flurry of responses. But it also shows up in moments like this after the Thanksgiving break, when I invited students to share one thing they did since Wednesday that they don't usually do over Thanksgiving break. And among the many things that students shared was one of them reported, and unfortunately several of them had contracted COVID. And what's amazing to me here is what you see, and I know the text is really small, but the emojis and the 9 replies from students. That's community. That's, to me, an effective discussion right in the middle of what might otherwise be just a lecture course, right? I also had channels for each week, I mentioned already, but here's a way to do quick assessment of learning in class. What idea or research finding, I asked, was new to you in this week's reading that you consider most important, interesting, surprising? Why? So they spent a few minutes, again, before pressing enter and seeing each other's and responding to each other, just sharing their own quick take on the readings. So I have that information right at the beginning of class, but we also have discussion outside. And very quickly, it looks super different in CCLE, where students had clear prompts and a structure for discussion. But to me, an effective discussion I could see was was happening when, I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong place here. When I could see in a pretty small class, students are going beyond the required 2 posts to go back and forth, really responding to each other's in-depth conversations.
Thank you, Sheva. You're right. A picture is worth 1,000 words. Josh, do you want to go ahead and also respond to the question about an engaging discussion in your course?
Sure, let me share my window. Can you all see this okay? Okay, so by the way, it's in dark mode just because I think it's easier on the eyes, but I can put it in white mode too if anyone wants me to. So I'm actually going to show you 3 different asynchronous discussions that occurred in the course. So these aren't real time. They happened with people posting a question and then other students answering the question. And there are kind of different categories of things, and I thought I'd show you a good example of each category. So this is an example of someone who posted anonymously with a question about some concept in the course, which in this case was where we were learning about far points and near points of the human eye in the context of a physics model of the human eye, and was having trouble understanding the difference between these two. And as you can see, there actually are multiple answers to this question by many different people, some of them including even diagrams that they drew themselves. And you can also see on the side here, I know the text might be kind of small, but there's this up arrow with upvotes, and you can see that a particular answer got 14 upvotes and went to the top, and is actually quite a good answer, it turns out. And the thing I like about this post and what this illustrates is that the format of this forum is such that multiple people can answer and get positive feedback on their answers, which I think is very nice. So, you know, if you answer a question and 7 people upvote your answer, it probably makes you feel pretty good about that topic, which I think is a nice thing. And you also notice that some of the answers even are anonymous. Like this answer here that was highly upvoted was anonymous, which is really interesting. You know, this person had a really great answer, but they were still uncomfortable posting it. And it's nice that they have the ability to do that anonymously, I think. Okay, so that's one. Another one is just sort of a fun post, and I actually think these are really great for community building. This one student has these diffraction glasses. Diffraction is a concept we discuss in the class. They have these diffraction glasses from high school, and showed a GIF of how they work. And then tons of students were saying, oh, this is so cool. Where do I get them? And then she posted a link to where you can buy them. And there's a little bit of gaming the system here because people are giving each other a lot of upvotes for saying this is super cool. But I actually think that's a great thing. If people are logging on and just engaging with each other and upvoting each other's posts and making each other feel great about interacting about physics, then I think that's awesome. So this was a nice example of just sort of building community around the concepts in the course. And then finally, this is an interesting one. This happened multiple times, actually, where an anonymous poster was having trouble with the quizzes and wanted some advice on how to study. And there are multiple posts here with various pieces of advice from different students who felt that what they were doing was working for them, as you can see. In fact, this is quite a long one. There's really quite a few people who answered. And I actually haven't looked through all of these in extreme detail to see how many of them I would agree are good advice. But I think that's kind of beside the point. To some degree, I think this is just giving people ideas and again allowing them to connect and build community. And some of these things are great. Other ones like if you're a visual learner, I would definitely recommend drawing diagrams. It's actually kind of well known in psychology at this point that the idea of learning styles is maybe not the sharpest in identifying how people learn well. So not everything here is necessarily that evidence-based, but I think it's just nice to see different types of posts people make and how these different things can build a diverse sense of community around the topic.
That's great. I love both of your examples, how the students are responding to each other, and the study tips is amazing. I think we should ask our students to do that for each other, but then maybe they wouldn't. So I don't know. The fact that it arose organically is really fabulous. For my facilitators who've been keeping an eye on the chat, is there a question that you think we could elevate at this point, or else I can ask for a raised Zoom hand. I think we have time for an audience comment or question.
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry, Kim, you want to go first?
Go ahead, Kim.
Yes, hi, it's Kim DeBacco from the online teaching and learning team at UCLA. I wanted to comment on Kathy's question at the bottom of the chat. Kathy's saying, how often do you check these forums? How does this type of forum impact your workload and student participation grading? I think a couple of comments that come from research and from a lot of experience as well. It's really good if you're kind of in there and you check. It's very quick in terms of workload. It's very quick to read through everything. You don't have to reply to everything. And I always say to instructors, you know, if you reply to everything that's posted, students are going to get a little bit uncomfortable and think you're going to pounce on everything. You know, so what you do, the best practice, I suppose, or good practice, is you read through the thread, you glance through, and then you might sort of get an idea for how to join this conversation, and you might do a threading, a kind of a weaving post that pulls it together. You might, and this might be after 6 postings or after 10, or it depends. It just depends on the discussion, but you'll know when to do it, and you'll kind of comment on a couple of the ideas that have come up. You'll redirect the attention and the discussion to something else, acknowledging what people are putting. But the important thing is that you're in there too. Because if you're seen to be active, this is part of your teaching presence online, is to be in the forum. So I think that's really important to do that. I mean, with things like when I've got active discussion forums, I actually schedule them into my calendar and go in every day if it's a course that's running, you know, right now, or every other day. It's your decision, you know, depends how big a part of the course discussion forums are. And I don't think the workload is actually a big deal. I enjoy most of the instructors that I've worked with, myself personally in my own course. I really enjoy lurking and sort of going in and looking, and every now and again I might say something. So student participation grading is, that's a whole other conversation. And I don't know if we're going to talk about grading later, but there's a couple of things you can do there. I mean, obviously, some discussion forums like the Moodle CCLE forum is set up so that grades can be assigned. You can assign points to postings. There's a lot of things to consider, though, and how you aggregate all the different posts that one student makes over a quarter is a challenge, and you need to think about that. You can also have students grade themselves, assess their own participation in forums if you give them the criteria too. And that's something that's actually a really good conversation to have with students at the beginning of the quarter, is to talk to them about if you're going to have deep discussions in discussion forums, then I think you need to set some expectations. You need to draw up some criteria. I've even negotiated criteria with my own students, and they were grad students, but we worked together and they figured out their participation criteria, and then they were able to grade themselves at the end, and I could glance through and have a look and moderate that if I needed to. Yeah, that's some ideas, and just commenting to Kathy's question, but others might have some points too as well on this.
Well, those are great points. And I think it leads into some of what you were saying, leads into the next question. So from the instructor's perspective, how do you personally engage with the discussion forum? How frequently do you check the forum for new questions or reply to students? And can you comment on the workload for you as the instructor? So great segue, Kim. And I'm going to start this one off with Chris.
Sure. So my interaction, I would say, has varied somewhat from class to class. So in classes where it is more kind of discussion based and where I really want the students to be talking to each other more, and that's the purpose of the use of the discussion forum, then I tend to lurk, as Kim was talking about, and kind of just look on. And if there's something that I have to say that's interesting to add to the discussion, I'll put it in. But I tend not to interact as much with those because the goal is for students to interact with each other. But in classes that are more typical exam-based classes, where I'm using Campuswire mainly as a place for students to ask questions about class material, then obviously I'm going to interact more. I want them to get the correct answers. So Melissa, I think, just brought up in the chat that you can have your email digest from Campuswire set at different periods. So you can have them send you an email every time a question is posted. You can have it sent at the end of the day, kind of all the questions that you get. And that can be really useful for you to kind of set it up so that you're not checking it constantly and seeing, is there any new questions? And you can just get that email and see like, okay, do I need to hop on and are any of these like super important questions that I need to answer right now? Can I wait till the end of the day to answer them? And so I'm usually pretty good about answering the questions, but I think I've actually, over time, I used to answer them like immediately, and I would just go on and start answering. I found it actually works better to not do that, because that gives the students a chance, if somebody else knows an answer to the question, to answer it themselves. And then I can go in and I can look and see, okay, is this a correct answer? You can use the upvote feature, and it'll, if you're the instructor, it'll give you a little like extra instructor endorsed answer or something like that. And so I've actually reduced the speed at which I've responded to some of these questions. The other thing I would say is you can also have your TAs help out. If you're teaching a TA class with TAs, they can also help out answering questions. And so I would say definitely it reduces the workload compared to trying to answer emails. But again, it's going to kind of depend on what your goals are and how often you want to interact with it.
Thanks, Chris. That makes a lot of sense. Let's go to Josh.
The same question about goals, right? I mean, about sort of time spent.
Yeah, how you engage with the discussion forum and time spent.
Yeah. I've taken an increasingly hands-off approach, I think, like Chris has indicated, to the point where now I actually very rarely answer any question. And when I do interact with students, when I think, for example, there might be an error, I typically will follow up with my own question that leads students towards a sort of path of finding their error. So I think there were probably around 700, there's usually for a class of 200, between like 700 and 1,000 posts in a given quarter. I probably answered like 2 questions or something like that. And the rest were just me saying, well, let me ask you a follow-up. What do you, like, if you were to do this, what would happen here? Or I think so-and-so might know. And then, you know, so my interaction has become pretty sparse. What I do is I do like look at the feed a lot, but it's mainly because I'm just interested. So at least in a class that large, I think if students understand the expectation and you set kind of a tone for discussion in the beginning of what's going to be happening, and that they know that you're supporting them there, even if you're not always answering, then you can get really surprisingly great and deep interactions between students, basically without having to do anything. At least that's been my experience so far.
Okay, I think I'm learning I've been answering questions too much. Gotta change my approach. Let's see, Tony, do you want to try this one?
Sure. So when I use Slack, like I said, I used it a little bit more for more informal sorts of discussions and things like that. Although students could contact me directly through DMs in there, or tag me on things and things like that in conversations there. In which case I would, you know, I certainly answered those sorts of things. But when students were just having kind of informal conversations, sometimes I would pop in and just give like a thumbs up or something like that. Like, especially if somebody posted something like, oh, you know, we were learning about this week. I found this article that relates to it, and I'd give it like a thumbs up or something like that. Or, you know, maybe comment on it like, oh yeah, that relates to blank or whatever it is. For the course where I use CCLE and the students were kind of required to post a certain number of times in the discussion forum, there I actually responded to all the questions, because we were actually using those forums. So we were doing asynchronous lectures, and then students, if they had questions about them, they had to post at least 2 questions throughout the course of the quarter through the course of the quarter, give or take. On the lectures, on the asynchronous lectures, and they would post them there. And then during the synchronous time, we would answer those questions. And so in those forums, I actually addressed every question, even if it was just, and I would do it after I did the synchronous lecture, and I would do it even if it was just to say, I actually talked about this in class today, check out the recording, or something along those lines. That I will say took a lot of time to do that, because I was like responding to kind of every single person. Although I did do a lot of cutting and pasting. If there were like multiple of the same question, I would just cut and paste and answer the same thing. Or I would say, actually, I answered this up above or something like that. But I checked my, you can check in CCLE in the discussion forums, you can see how often you posted. And it was like on the order of like, over 1,000 posts that I made, over the course of time. So like after each lecture, I would probably, after each of the synchronous lectures, I would spend about an hour after the lecture just like answering those questions again, even if it was just like, I actually answered this in class, check that out. So it was just like kind of like going through and paging through really quickly and stuff. So, but that was for a very specific thing because we asked the students to post in there.
Right. Thank you. So moving on to the next question, what kind of documentation or guidance or structure do you provide for students so that they can use the discussion forum? And if you do have documentation or instructions, would you be willing to share it after the session? And I'm going to ask Josh to start this one off.
Yeah, I'd be happy to share. What I typically do is I make a post in the beginning of the quarter that outlines the purpose of the forum and some guidelines for the community. And I just mentioned the sort of moderation that will happen, like in the event that there's a malicious post, for example, because anonymous posting is possible, I make it known that we would take down the post, for example. And I'd be happy to share the wording of that. It's certainly not perfect. And I'd be open to changing it if anyone has any suggestions. And then I also make a post about like how to use the forum to some degree. Like in this particular forum in Campuswire, you can type mathematics using a particular language called LaTeX that some people might be familiar with. So I give a little introduction to that, for example. That's really all I do. And typically it seems to be enough to get things going. And the guidelines have completely essentially eliminated any malicious posting with the exception of one case in probably something like 4,000 posts. So.
That sounds successful. Let's see. Let's turn this one now to, where am I? I think Tony is going to speak to this one as well. Or yeah, did I already ask Tony this one? No. Yes, Tony, please.
Yeah, so for the course where they were required to, we did use some language, and it was just like, how often they had to post and what kind of things we were looking for and things like that. And then for Slack, we didn't have any real documentation, although I think we did talk about it in class, like in terms of kind of similar things that were just said about like, we will be monitoring the posts, and for things that like, we would pull down posts if we found them offensive or inappropriate in various ways and things like that. So we didn't have any sort of thing there. But again, that was because we were using it for kind of more informal sorts of conversations and kind of just as a way to get in touch with us and with each other, right? For them to get in touch with each other.
And Sheva, why don't you speak to this in the Slack context?
Sure, yeah. So because we insisted that students use Slack and for various purposes, and we found out on the first day, or maybe in a pre-survey, that 50% of the students, like myself, had not used Slack before. We did provide I think just a one-page set of instructions and some links for more information, but we also took aside 5 to 10 minutes on the first day of class and one of my undergrad assistants walked the students through some basic things, including, look to the person on your right in the Zoom screen and send them a direct message. So they practiced a couple of things so that we could then, hold that expectation. And even still, in my third quarter with these students, there are a couple who just can't get it together to respond in a timely way. And I consider this part of my professional development mentoring of my students, that once I identify that this is an issue for a couple of students, I connect them with another student who then meets up and they just go over a couple things so that they can, whatever it is, like put their notifications on or something. But they then again have no excuses, and it's going to serve them well later on as well.
Thank you. So Kumiko, go
I
ahead.
was just going to say kind of a follow-up question to if Sheva, Tony, or Josh, or anyone could answer. And then I'm not familiar with Campuswire, so this might be a more question of Slack, but can students create their own sort of channel to start the conversation, or is there a question channel that they're supposed to post their own questions? How does that sort of, how much of the structure is kind of set by you and then they just respond, or is that more organic?
I can speak a little bit to Slack. So we set up some multiple channels, like some that were like, one that was like random, that was for like random stuff, like so students like posted funny memes and things like that on there. And then we had one that was like for questions about course material, right? So you can kind of set up those sorts of channels, right? And then obviously we had like a private channel that was just for the instructors. And again, we use that quite a bit for keeping in touch with each other. And I know, like, so we're using the same Slack workspace this quarter for our cluster, and the clusters are a little weird. So this quarter, it's a year-long course, and this quarter there's seminars that are taught that are part of the cluster. And what some of the TAs did was just set up a separate channel on there that was just for their seminar. So that way they didn't have to set up a whole new Slack. They just set up a separate channel on there that was just for their seminar this quarter. Yeah.
Thank you. Are there any other questions in the chat that any of the facilitators would like to elevate, or anyone from any of the participants want to raise a hand, any of the audience?
So I promised to float this question for Rebecca, and she had asked, if in terms of Slack, did you end up creating your own workspace, or are you using UCLA Slack? I saw Tony had responded. Sheva, if you want to provide any insights on that too.
I literally created the workspace, and 2 days later, UCLA platform was available. So I was so grateful that there were only 3 of us in the teaching team on this workspace, and it made it so easy to bring students aboard. When I promised them it was through UCLA, they didn't have to do anything fancy.
Nice. Thanks for that. So let's see. Next question is, what do you wish discussion platforms could do that the one you use cannot? So let's start this one with Melissa.
Yeah, sure. So I find using Campuswire grading is not super integrated. So I use it in a way that's ungraded. But if I wanted to really grade their individual posts, or say, can I give this a score out of 3? How much depth is in this particular comment? It would be really challenging using Campuswire. So I can see, people who are using the CCLE discussion board. So what Sheva showed, you have Turnitin, so you have some plagiarism check there. There's some nice features that make it easier to actually grade in a platform that's more connected to like the UCLA CCLE platform. So that's something I would love if grading was a little bit more integrated. It also is nice to kind of see your classroom stats. So that's something I thought that Piazza did really well. As a Campuswire user, Campuswire doesn't in the same way, whereas Piazza, you could get one screen that showed you who are your top posters, what percentage of your students post anonymously, how many posts have there been, and what is the average time to respond. And I'm somebody who's really competitive, so I like to share some of those things with students. Like on average, people's comments were responded to in 20 minutes, like you're doing a good job. And I think that really motivates them to continue to post, but I find that information a little bit harder to gather or like scrape off of Campuswire compared to Piazza. So that's something that I wish Campuswire would do. It does have insights, but for me, I don't know, they don't seem to like populate in the same way.
Thanks, Melissa. And now Sheva, can you answer this one?
Wow. Well, I wish I didn't even think of those features, Melissa, that that you wish you had. So that, and then I wish I didn't have to use CCLE and Slack. So if those could be, if the qualities of threaded discussion, plus these bunch of other features, including Turnitin, that are part of CCLE's discussion forums were possible in Slack, that I would prefer not to have to send them two places. On the other hand, no one has complained. I think I've still we've kept it reasonably limited.
Thank you. Would any of the other panelists like to respond to this one? Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, actually, one thing that I really kind of have missed, I think we can now do it in CCLE at UCLA, so Caroline and others can confirm, but one of the things I used to like to be able to do was to collate and download discussion forums as a text file and actually look at a whole discussion thread in a text file and be able to use that material in some other way to inspire something else or to read something from it, you know, use it, reinterpret it and bring it back into lecture. I think we can do that now, but there was a while there when we couldn't do it. And I find that incredibly useful in humanities and social science courses where we kind of, you know, another feature that's really great in Moodle that I'm not sure, I have to check, I'm not sure we can do it in Canvas actually, but in Moodle you can go in, and this is great for TAs who can go in and collate all of the posts that one person has made. And it's really great when you come to grade, you can actually see all the discussion posts made by one person, you know, and that enables you to sort of get a collation across all the different weeks and topics of what one person has done. So that can be a really helpful practice too. So yeah, watch out for those kinds of things. I think the other thing that I really like, I love in Canvas, we can't do it in CCLE so easily, is you can respond by making a video or an audio podcast kind of response in Canvas. So you can be reading what's on screen, you can click reply, and you can make a short video or a short audio recording and send that back instead of typing a response. And I think that's great. I've also seen another great platform that's out there called Harmonize that does all of this and more. If anyone's had a look at Harmonize, it's terrific, but which is very visual and very much more sort of accommodating for photos and video and things like that. So yeah.
Thanks. Thanks a lot. So I'm just going to ask the last formal question before we go into breakout rooms, although maybe we'll elevate some more questions from the chat before going into the breakout rooms. But the last question, and I think maybe all the panelists can answer this one, is if a colleague is considering trying a discussion platform, what advice would you give them to get started? And you can also use this opportunity to say anything that you didn't get a chance to say yet. So who would like to start that one off?
I guess I'll go.
Great.
I would say from interacting with a lot of faculty who have asked me this question and then tried to implement something, I've noticed that people who are sort of ambitious in their first implementation tend to have worse experiences. So my suggestion would be to try to do something in a very lightweight way, with maybe like one or two main goals, and then later you can add on to that. But there's no reason why you shouldn't try something, have like very like sort of reasonable sort of lower expectations, and not be too hard on yourself if it doesn't go perfectly, and then go from there.
That sounds like a philosophy of life, Josh. I'm all for it. Okay, great. Who'd like to contribute next?
I can go ahead.
Okay, and then
sorry, Chris, I didn't see.
Go ahead, Melissa, and then Chris can be next.
Yeah, so I think just in general, a lot of students have experience in other courses using discussion platforms. So I think the transition is usually pretty easy. So they probably have used something at some point. So they've probably used Campuswire or Piazza or something in another course. So I think the transition is relatively easy, and the biggest barrier is just setting it up. So if you set it up, I think students will use it. I do think it's not a lot of work, and I agree with Josh, kind of going for the lower level implementation first and then kind of building from there, I think is a good piece of advice. And I think that just small things signal that you care and you value their questions and you're giving them a space to ask those questions. So I think just the idea of having a discussion board platform in a class does a lot to create community, even if they don't necessarily use it. I think having the option to ask questions somewhere is important.
Thanks a lot. Go ahead, Chris.
Sure. So I actually noticed someone in the chat, I don't remember who it was talking about students seeing some of these assignments as busy work. And I think that's one of the key things that I would give as advice is really try to structure it in a way that it is not going to be busy work for the students. And that can depend on what your goals are for this discussion board and what you kind of want the students to get out of it. And it can be something as simple as framing it at the beginning of the quarter and telling students, the reason I'm having you do this assignment is not just because I want to check off the box and give you a grade for it, but because I want you to be, I don't know, into current events or something. I want you to be looking at the news and finding articles and talking about them with each other and interacting with each other. And even if something as simple as that at the beginning of the quarter, telling them like, there's a purpose behind this assignment. It's not just something I'm giving you to give you an additional thing to do. That can be super helpful. But it's also kind of thinking about what your class is and what the purpose of your class is. And if that class is more open to just using it as a Q&A forum and you're not assigning students have to do X number of posts, do that for that kind of class. If it's one that's more discussion based and you want to encourage engagement, then you might need to add in some incentive and actually have a graded assignment. But I would say, think about what your goal for the class is and communicate it really well to students why you're giving this assignment, and that can be super helpful.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think that's good advice for not just for discussion platforms, right, but for everything that we do in our courses is make sure it's for a reason and not busy work. Great. So either Tony or Sheva, did you have anything you wanted to say here? Is that a no, you've said it all, or go ahead, Sheva.
Ask for help. I don't think I'm not sure I've done anything original with my Slack. When I think of, it's just, there's a lot of people on campus who know a lot, have done a lot. So no shame building on that.
And now you know at least 5 of them just from this from this panel. And Tony, any last words?
No, I think that covers, it. The one thing I was going to say, and because I saw this come up in the chats, and so I wanted to address it. I think it came up relatively early. Is just that, like, you're going to set up something for your class, and as was said, you want to give them some purpose behind it and why they're using it and things like that. And the other thing I just want to make really clear, because I think this came up earlier, like, the students will get in touch with each other in some other way that you have no idea about. And that's totally fine, right? Like, they will have their, whatever it is, group me or whatever, and things like that. And that's totally cool, right? Like, they will do that, right? And you can, and in some ways you can sometimes facilitate that. So like in the course I'm teaching right now, we have a Slack, but there's like a channel that like, I'm not, like, it's private to the students, right? And they can actually, and things like that. They set it up themselves. I let them do that, right? And that's totally fine. Like, and so I just wanted to make that clear because I know it came up earlier in the thing. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that's an important consideration. Caroline, you have your hand raised.
I do, thank you. I just wanted to make sure that Kathy's question was answered because she has a really good one, and this can go to any of the panelists as well as to anyone who's participating. But she asked, do you find that these discussion questions, asking forums, reduce students coming to office hours, or perhaps these students are more comfortable asking in cyberspace anonymously? And thank you, Josh, for responding in the chat. So this is open to the panelists as well as anybody in participating, your take on these kind of chat tools and whether or not it reduces the attendance in office hours.
Just for the sake of the recording, I just wanted to point out that Josh did say that he hasn't seen a reduction in office hours participation as far as he can tell.
That's been
Yeah, I
true
think
for
that a
me.
lot of the posts happen at times where you don't have office hours, like especially for students in other time zones. Like I have students posting at like 3 in the morning, which is totally fine, right? Like it's a place for them to post, and I can't offer office hours at 3 in the morning. So I think it works, and I think it might capture a different demographic of student.
I think you can also use it to kind of push questions to office hours or to kind of lecture if you're going to use it. And if somebody asks a question, and I mean, I teach economics, there's a lot of graph questions that I'm not really going to be able to answer in a Campuswire post, but I can say, if you come to office hours and ask this question, I can go over it there. Or if you can't make office hours, I can do it during a recorded lecture. I can do it at the beginning of the lecture or something like that. So you can also use it to kind of channel students to office hours that normally wouldn't have come to office hours. So could potentially even increase office hour attendance if that's what you would like to use it for.
Great.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think a lot about my, especially my URM and transfer students, professional development and prep for grad school. They need to come to office hours if they want to develop relationships with instructors. They need to start getting comfortable talking to instructors. And so I think that if they're, especially students from some cultural backgrounds, are especially likely to feel a big distance between themselves and an authority figure like an instructor. And if I can model warm and supportive responses to questions they might think are so stupid they could only ask them on a discussion forum, then there might be a few who see that and maybe just are a little more comfortable coming to office hours. So I don't want it to replace office hours. I'd hope it would actually encourage more direct contact.
Great, that makes sense. Kim, why don't you take the last comment before, and then Kamiko can lead us into the next portion.
Yeah, I was just going to say that this kind of conversation about office hours versus discussion forum, gets us back to that, to the point, I think, that there are different kinds of discussions. And, it's a linguistics thing here. You've got scholarly discussions, and I like to see those happening in the discussion forums, like the CCLE forums and the Campuswire. That's where we go deep. That's where we have discussions around the reading or the content. And that's got its clear rhetorical purpose. And then we've got something like, we've got chatter about the course, questions about how things are running, the administrivia that we have to do, reminders and so on. For me, that's where I want to use either Slack or I might have an open forum, a general forum in my top block of my course that's not associated with any particular week. And in that might be the space where we have that kind of conversation. And then office hours is for a different rhetorical purpose, be for a different reason. One of the things I love is that I've worked with instructors who've harvested questions out of the discussion forum, and they announce that they're going to be talking about that in office hours or addressing that, as well as addressing student questions, giving students a purpose to come to office hours, selling office hours, if you like, with some more information. Interestingly, just as a last comment, I've noticed in recent months, instructors I've been working with have been saying that during the remote times of remote instruction, the pandemic, they've been getting more students coming to office hours. I don't know, it's kind of interesting. Some instructors have really noticed an increase in participation. So I feel like that they're different, that you can keep them for different kind of conversations. The other point, actually, quickly, is universal design for learning, UDL. As Shiva was saying, you've got multiple kinds of options for students. Some students are more comfortable working verbally with you in office hours, having that kind of conversation. Other students are more comfortable expressing themselves in a forum. So you could see it in that way too, that there are different opportunities for self-expression. Yeah.
Thank you, Kim. Kamiko, why don't you take the reins and lead us onward?
Okay, well, first of all, I would like to thank all of our discussant panelists, and for those of you and our audience for a great conversation and lots of helpful tips. And I hope that this will encourage everyone to do more. So thank you, and a round of applause for everyone. And so we have a little bit of time. So what we wanted to do is we're going to open up breakout rooms, and we have two breakout rooms that are available. One is for Slack and one is for Campuswire. And in the if all of you know, I think people already okay. And then you can go to your breakout room. You can join in yourself. If you hover where the numbers are, you can click the join. In the Slack room, it'll be Sheva and Tony, and Campuswire, Melissa, Josh, and Chris. So I will, hopefully everyone will jump into the breakout rooms.
Yes.
And I'll see you there soon.